Welcome everybody. I see all the participants streaming in. This is great to see. Now, everyone, welcome. Apologies on our slightly delayed start. Even in this modern day and age, we still always experience some kind of technical difficulties. Hopefully one of our speakers will be joining us shortly. I'm going to put it down to the earthquake in Melbourne and knocking out his internet. No, I can claim that after. But no, look, trust everyone is well and safe after that event. If you are Melbourne based, it is a bit of an anomaly and none of us were quite expecting that. But no, welcome and good evening. And welcome to tonight's The Future of Australian Packaging webinar hosted by Monash Food Innovation, or MFI as we are more commonly known. So my name is Adam Norris and I'm the design manager at Monash Food Innovation. I'll be your facilitator for this lovely evening proceedings. So right into it. What does the future of packaging look like? This is a question that many of you tonight would have asked at one stage or another. Globally, the food industry is moving towards increased ownership and transparency in its role to affect large systematic challenges across resources, energy, and sustainability. Tonight's webinar really focuses on the most critical element to any food and beverage product, the packaging that surrounds it, and pack elements used over the product's life cycle. Within 5 years, the Australian packaging space is set for drastic changes to address and assist businesses to make this transition to more equitable and sustainable packaging solutions. With large adoption of alternative materials for packaging solutions and initiatives in Australia, such as the APCO 2025 National Packaging Targets, where we see retailers like Woolworths have aggressively pursued pledges to be 100% recyclable, reusable, or compostable in packaging by 2023. Now more than ever, it is important for packaging business to start to understand ways to leverage the emerging technologies and solutions and move Australian industry from reactionary to preemptive leaders in the product and packaging space. So tonight, I'm very pleased to welcome that we'll be hearing from three leading industry representatives in the Australian packaging space. I'd like to welcome and thank our speakers, Warren Batchelor, who's the Deputy Director at the Bioresource Processing Institute of Australia, or otherwise known as BioPRIA, Lily Barnett, who's the ARL Program Manager at the Australian Packaging Covenant Organisation, otherwise known as APCO, and hopefully we'll be joined shortly by Ralph Moyle, who is the Education Coordinator at the Australian Institute of Packaging.
Adam, Ralph is actually with us, but he's on the other side away from the presenting panel. So you may consider, leading with Ralph again, or you may consider not.
Do you know, this is going to be a nice little test of the technology. I think I can let Ralph in the figment of our back door into this webinar session, which is great to know that the technology is adjustable in that fashion. But thank you for letting me know, Rod. Let's see if we can pull him in.
He's definitely in the chat box, so we know he's alive out there somewhere in cyberlands.
Oh, look at this, everybody. Technology as it works. Ralph has now joined us as a panelist. Ralph is our third speaker, but I might keep the order with Lily and Warren starting us off. But yes, tonight's proceedings will be the two presentations with an opportunity for a 5-minute open mic Q&A at the end of each presentation. Otherwise, please feel free to use the chat box and the Q&A functions at the bottom of your screen for any questions you have whilst watching the presentations. The webinar is recorded and will be shared to all the participants, so do not fear about missing a slide or some spoken words. So without further ado, I will hand over to Lily and Warren to start the proceedings.
Thank you, Adam, and I will attempt to share my screen, and let's hope this works for everyone at home as well.
Oh, I see something. Yes, perfect.
Out there? Fantastic.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, well, thank you very much, Adam, for the lovely introduction. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lily Barnett and I am the ARL Program Manager at APCO, or the Australasian Recycling Label Program. Before I jump into it, I would like to just quickly acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. Although virtually, I'd like to pay my respects to those elders, both past, present and emerging. And what I am here to talk to you about today, as Adam just touched on there before, is our national packaging targets. give everyone a bit of a recap overview about what they're all about and how we're progressing along that journey. And I did in particular today want to talk through designing for recovery, because it is probably the one we get the most questions on, and how we can focus and prioritise and all those types of things. The other aspect I'd like to touch on is a really cool piece of research that we've actually, as APCO, been working closely with Monash Uni on, and in particular, Warren Batchelor has been fantastic in conducting some research for us that we've been working on for some time, and we're finally getting towards the end of that project, and it's going to be having some fantastic results that we can share. So giving everyone a bit of a sneak peek as to what we've been going through, so hopefully we can shed some light on that area in particular, because we know there's been a big focus, so happy to shed some more light on that tonight. So jumping into the targets, this is sort of our probably most up-to-date infographic of the targets, and I really like it in particular because it highlights that loop as to really why we have the 4 different packaging targets. So as you can see, the first one there on the left-hand side is our 100%. And just clarifying, because we do get this question a lot, that one is about making sure we're designing to be reusable, recyclable or compostable. So really trying to design for the system. And that's something that will evolve as the system obviously evolves too. And then phasing out single-use plastics. Now, this is something that APCO is primarily focused on the packaging side of things, but also supporting all of the government, state government approaches as well, and trying to help harmonise those as much as we can. Then we have the 70% target in particular, which is about recovery of that plastic packaging in particular. And it really needed an extra bit of a highlight because of how low we are at the moment in that space. And keeping in mind that one is recycled and composted as well. And then recycled content being our 50% average across all packaging is another clarification always for that one. Some businesses have picked up 50% in their own packaging. We have now released more of a material breakdown for that one, but it is all about trying to get as much as we possibly can, because the purpose of that is so we can pull everything back through that loop and make sure we're getting that recovery. Now, where we're at the moment, and I have to put a disclaimer out that we are shortly releasing the more up-to-date version of this, so this might be out of date pretty soon, but still a really good snapshot for last financial year, well, I should say the one before that now, that we are tracking along pretty well for our 100% target. However, for the 70% target of actually recovering that plastics, you can see we're still a very long way away from that one, so only at 18% so far. However, for recycled content, we are still tracking along very well there as well. So originally the target was 30%, but now we are pushing well above that. We didn't want to sit back and relax. It's important for us to continue on and progress from there. So aiming higher for that 50%. And again, that one is an average across all packaging and by 2025. And then last but not least, again, that problematic and unnecessary single-use plastic packaging. I'll touch on how we're going in that one in just a minute when I show you some of those resources that we've got. So to jump into designing for recovery, what we have been able to do is pull together a few key resources in this space I wanted to take you through because they give you a really good snapshot of all the different areas. So the first piece I wanted to highlight was our packaging future. Now, this is our collective impact framework as to how we will achieve those 2025 targets. So first disclaimer to definitely jump in and have a look at that one if you haven't already. The way it is structured is under those 3 pillars that you would have seen before in the first slide for the target. So it's all about 3 different outcome areas. The first one being making sure we're designing for recovery, then making sure in the second area we've got that collection system available and the recycling infrastructure available, and then making sure we've got those really strong end markets as well. So there's some key actions under each of those that not only APCO is taking, but APCO members should be taking, as well as other mutually reinforcing activities that are either coming soon or are well underway as well that really reinforce those areas. And then for our single-use plastics approach, we actually released at the end of last year an action plan as to what are some of those priority materials we should be focusing in on in the packaging space. So a few of those include a few different EPS formats, as well as rigid polystyrene and rigid PVC as well, were a couple that were called out in that space. It's a really fantastic resource. I worked really closely, actually personally, on it with our working groups that we deliver at APCO, so it's a great one to jump in, have a read of, as well as our national compostable packaging strategy was recently released. So if you're going down that pathway, definitely have a look at that one. And then the Australasian Recycling Label Program is another one of our key resources available to APCO members to understand if their packaging is currently recyclable or not, and then making sure they communicate to consumers how that works. And just to touch on a few more coming soon, we are doing some work on reusable packaging as well as recycled content. We had a lot of feedback from members that tracing recycled content and validating that is a really difficult space. So it's something we've been working on for a little bit and will be coming soon. So we're making an announcement the end of the month, so keep an eye out for that one. Also doing some work in the soft plastic space. A few of you might already be involved in the work with AFGC, and we're all capturing that as well. And then fibre-based packaging guidance is the one that we'll touch on primarily today, but definitely some more coming in that space. And just to quickly point out a few others that we've got, obviously designing for recovery, there's always going to be trade-offs as you go through that process. You want to be preserving and making sure you've got a longer shelf life and avoiding all those other unintended consequences. So using things like the sustainable packaging guidelines and following that waste hierarchy is really important. So we've got a few key ones there. Another one we get a lot of questions on, as I touched on, is that compostable packaging. So these considerations for compostable plastic packaging, cannot recommend it more. It has a really fun interactive decision-making tree actually within it. So if you're looking to go down this pathway, do make sure you jump in, use the decision-making tree as you're in it, and it will let you know if it's feasible to start investigating in that space or if it just doesn't make sense. And there's lots of really key definitions in there, reinforcing those Australian standards there as well. So highly recommend. So now jumping into giving you just a bit of an overview as to why we undertook this research with Monash Uni. We really did it because there was a big gap in understanding as to what was technically recyclable locally for fibre-based packaging. Now, as we know with fibre-based packaging, and particularly in the food and beverage sector, there's always going to be extra either coatings or additives or things like that to the paper that mean that it can protect your product and deliver that safely to the shelf and to your consumer. But then that can make it really hard when you get to the recycling process because there's lots of liquid that's needed to sort of pull apart and get access to those fibres to then reprocess them again. And we really saw that the packaging industry was calling out for some more guidance. And we also saw a big shift and a big pivot there where people were moving away from plastic packaging into fibre-based packaging. So there's a couple of considerations we knew we needed to get on top of before that shift happened too quickly. So our objectives were to try and establish an evidence-based and agreed industry threshold for pulpability. So in the fibre packaging recycling space, you want to be getting as much pulp out of your fibre to be able to claim that recyclability. So what we worked with Warren on was a technical standard or a technical methodology for assessment to understand that, and he'll tell you a bit more about that in just a minute. And also then obviously trying to gain that increased understanding and in turn provide more detailed and evidence guidance back to businesses in Australia to understand what's the best way to design that packaging so that we're getting that recovery at the end. Now keeping in mind, we've obviously got waste export bans coming in for mixed paper, so this one's a really important one to keep in mind. Now, we did a lot of work to get to this stage. So working groups over the years have been focusing in on this, and there's probably a few of you on here who have been involved in that. So thank you very much. And just to give you a bit of background on that, we've done lots of local and international review of different laboratory evaluations and some consultation. That was back in 2019. Then Warren has gone through some actual physical testing and analysing some of those results. We have also done some consultation sessions with a large group of both a local and international audience, as well as doing targeted paper mill consultation on all of this work as well. And then last but not least, it has been going through the APCO Technical Advisory Committee as well. So they sit under helping manage our Australasian recycling label program. So what's next, before I hand over to Warren, is just that we do have that technical advisory committee underway, and what we're hoping to be able to release shortly is some updated design guidance for fibre-based packaging, as well as a testing protocol that businesses who are looking into either purchasing this or as a packaging manufacturer that has a solution in this space, something we can all be working towards, that sort of common ground to evidence our recyclability of fibre-based packaging here in Australia, and I should say New Zealand as well, because we've been doing that there, and then also updating our packaging recyclability evaluation portal tool. But this is an ever-evolving space, so definitely something we want to continue doing work in this space, particularly because we know that food contact or contamination is a big concern for paper mills, so something we're continuing to work through as well. So before I pass on to Warren, my 3 kind of key takeaways for you all is definitely to use that extensive suite of resources. There's a lot of strategic direction in there to help with where Australia is progressing towards, and some detailed design guidance if that helps as well. I'd also really encourage you to obviously collaborate with your supply chain as you work in this space. We cannot all do this in isolation. We've really got to work with each other to try and, you know, share our learnings. If you've got a problem, it's more than likely other people have. So it's really important to be asking for the detail, I think, is what I've really seen the industry get into now, rather than just someone, you know, putting forward maybe a new packaging item and you think, oh, that's great, really digging into the detail about what testing have we done to see if it actually is recoverable? Do we know what impact it might be having on the system as we go through that? It's something that the industry is really cognizant of, as we're obviously evolving our waste and recycling space and looking at different avenues. It's really important to make sure we've got potentially a recovery pathway there to make sure we're working for that circular solution. And last but not least, do make sure you engage your consumers in this process as well. We've seen lots of businesses invest a lot of money into something that is, you know, technically really recyclable, but from our research, we see that about 30% of packaging doesn't actually get recovered because the consumer doesn't know what to do with it. So the Australasian Recycling Label program is there. It's free to APCO members. So please use it so you can make sure that all your hard work does end up in the right bin so we can get it recovered. So I think that's enough from me. I might pass over to you, Warren, if you don't mind.
Yes, thanks very much, Lily. So what I'd like to talk to you today about is the work that we've done with APCO to, here we're looking at laminates. So if we have the next slide, please. So obviously the paper, the cardboard side of things works reasonably well for recycling. You know, we get high recovery rates. In Australia, we have a high percentage of the cardboard and the packaging made from fibre, which is from recycled material. But obviously, this has very poor barrier properties. So very common to develop a laminate, you know, so that you're, for example, adding a layer of low density polyethylene. Now, the question is, what does that do to the recyclability? You know, and how do we measure this? How can we design the layers that we're adding to maximize the recyclability? You know, what do you need to be able to make it recoverable in a paper mill? Next slide, please. So our first stage was that we had a look at everything in the literature, you know, a whole series of different reports, and we found that there was a real lack of consistency. Part of this is actually due to the equipment people do or don't have, so there's always for this type of, well, not always, but there's generally for this type of approach where some sort of repulping operation and then evaluation of the results. But you can see that there's a range of different solids concentrations they're using the repulping, different temperatures. Sometimes they're using screens to separate out the large contaminants, sometimes not. So there was a real mess, lack of consistency. Everyone's doing somewhat different things. So I guess we've identified that. And then we've done a consultation process. Next slide, please. Of what was available within Australia, not just the methods internationally. And you can see that there's a range of different equipment. There's not one set of equipment that we could use or recommend. So instead, what we've done is we've looked at, what is feasible. If we look at have different conditions, what are we able to achieve? Do we achieve comparable results? So to allow us to look between different laboratories as well, and to be able to recommend a method for repulpability. So next slide, please. What we've done is we've got a number of samples. We have then cut our samples up into 5 by 5 centimeters, roughly. And then we've looked at 3 different repulping conditions. So a standard disintegrator, this is something used in paper making at room temperature, a standard disintegrator at elevated temperature with sodium hydroxide, and that is replicating what you have in repulping in a paper mill. And then, but the consistency is much, much lower than what you'd have in a paper mill. And then where we've got a hydropulper, where this is a scaled down version of what you'd have in a paper mill. And so, the solids content is much more representative of what you'd be doing in recycling. So we had 3 different methods. And next slide, please. And after we've done our repulping for different times, we've done 2 sets of screening. So firstly, to remove really large flakes of material, really coarse rejects, I should say. So that's large fragments of plastic, perhaps with or without some fibers attached to them. Then the second one is we've done a finer screen, and this removes any bundles of fibers which have been separated, and also small bits of plastic with fibers attached. And finally, we've looked at just making some sheets and having a look at the appearance. So the primary thing we're looking at here is what is our yield? How much of the material that you've got going in are you getting coming through as, after you've removed these 2 fractions of material which wouldn't be acceptable in paper making? Okay, so if we have the next slide, please. So these are the materials that we tested. These are what APCO have sourced, and these are a range of materials in the market. And you can see that there are laminates, some coatings, and then a couple of different grades with wet strength. And so if we next slide, please. So the result is, obviously we had 3 different pulping methods. We're primarily looking at yield. So how much material can we recover? We believe that this is a method which gives at least something which could be representative of what you would achieve in a paper mill. So how, does it matter exactly what the method we're doing? So we're comparing between measurement techniques. We're looking at the breakdown between the coarse and the fine rejects. And then finally, what does all of this look like? So if I can have the next slide, please. So this is the results. So this is the first of this, just standard disintegrator at 20 degrees Celsius. So if you haven't seen it, it's a couple of liters, low solids content, and you've got a propeller in this which spins and agitates the fiber suspension. And so what you can see here is actually really interesting. Firstly, even at some of the lower values of repulping, this is the number of times the propeller spins, for some of these samples, you're getting really excellent yields. So yields 90% plus, for one sample. Yields that after the full repulping operation, you're at least above 80%. And so we've got 5 samples where the yields are above 80%, 2 or 3 samples where the yields are 90% plus. And then unfortunately, you can see that we've also got 3 samples where it would be difficult to repulp these, where the yield is still sitting at around 50%. Even after a long time sitting in the repulper, or 70%, and so that means you're getting a really large fraction of material which will be coming out as rejects. Okay, next slide, please. So these are the same results with a standard disintegrator at 50 degrees with sodium hydroxide to help pulping. And from this, you can see that there's actually very little difference between what we saw in the previous set of results and what we saw in this results. You still had 5 samples with very good yields, 1 sample which was a bit marginal, and then 2 samples with very poor yields. So if we have the next slide, please. This is the Lamort hydropulper, repulper, and this is something which is a cut down version of what you would get industrially. It is a little bit harder to sample the material because it's high solids content, so you get a bit of fluctuation, but the ranking between the samples is still the same. So you still have the 2 wet strength materials with very low yield and several samples which have very good yield, and here a couple which are a bit marginal. But if I can have the next slide, please. When we look at the comparison between the different techniques, we're seeing excellent agreement, firstly, in the disintegrator, depending on either 50 degrees or room temperature. And this is leading us to at least simplify our methods. We're able to say that from the results that we're getting good reproducibility independent of the method, that the final yields that we're getting seem to be reproducible between methods, and that given that one of these methods is reproducing industrial hydropulper, we're confident that these results will then be applying over to industrial scale repulping. If we have the next slide, please. So this just looks at the breakdown between into coarse rejects, and you can see that for a lot of these samples, you have relatively few coarse rejects, but particularly the 2 wet strength grades, you have quite a lot of materials. If I can have the next ones, please. This is showing that pretty much most of this material at 20 degrees was the coarse rejects, and that for most of these samples, you have very little other materials coming through as rejects. So that would also help in the repulping process. And next slide, please. So this is what the sheets look like. So here we have a sheet, sample number 4. This was, I'm just trying to remember, I think it was a single layer laminate LDPE. And after disintegration, you can see that you're getting a very nice sheet. Very, very few visible defects in it. So this would be quite acceptable for paper making. Whereas sample 7 was one of the high wet strength materials. And you can see that, sorry, I forgot to say, go forward. You can see that this would be unacceptable, that you have a mixture of different colored materials, some white areas, which might be polymer. The color is partially printed, and you can see that the appearance is really poor. So that was one of the wet strength materials. If I could have the next slide, please. This was also one of the wet strength materials where you can see a large amount of very poor looking material, unacceptable, or very, I shouldn't say unacceptable, very difficult to make an acceptable paper sheet out of that. So if I can have the next slide, please. Yeah, our conclusions are that we actually had 5 samples which we think had very good yields, 1 sample with a marginal yield, and a couple of samples where the yield wasn't so good. But the 3 methods that we had actually gave good agreement for extensive treatment, that we're able to use these, I think, with confidence to say what we think would be giving a good yield in repulping, for such material. So if I have the next slide, please. So we've now since been going through an industry consultation process, talking about the pulping conditions that we used, comparing it to what the industry is doing. We used a 2-stage process. The industry says that, well, normally they only use 1, and so they're recommending that we just have a single stage. And so this would be the fine reject screen, and so this would obviously be catching all of the coarse and the fine rejects. And they're also saying that, as far as they're concerned, they also want to see hand sheets made from the accepts, and then we're still in consultation as to what properties. And it would be likely that the properties would be specific to the particular recycling operation and the particular application that you're wanting to use the fibre for. Okay, I think that's for me. So I guess both Lily and I would be very happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Warren, and thank you, Lily. Yes, so we'll open out to any questions. If anyone would like to actually ask one live, we've got that capability. Please put a question or a Q in the chat box and I can open you up for a live question. Otherwise, there's a couple in the Q&A section, and we'll see if anyone would like to ask a question live. Got a couple in the Q&A then that we might go towards whilst we wait to see if anyone wants to go live in front of everyone. I know it's quite intimidating at times, but we have a question from Antonio Paddy. Hello, Tony. Good to see you aboard. But he's asking a question around the collaboration between packaging and the makers of the contents of that packaging, and around, can there be more assistance provided in especially sustainable packaging, and whether through packaging there could be ways to eliminate or minimize the clever contents through that design. He gives an example, which is LUSH and their solid cake shampoos, removing the need for plastic packaging for liquids.
Well, Adam, I'll try it. I'll have a crack at answering that one, and then Lily will help me out at the end. Look, there are many examples out there already, and if I might go back to Unilever's stance of about 15 years ago, where they went through so many of the detergents, cleaners, Cotties went through their cordials, and they literally took the water out. That reduced the size of the packaging, the weight of the packaging, and then the consumer merely added the water at the end. And if you go through the sustainable packaging guidelines that Lily referred to in her presentation, and I'll touch on, they went through about 4 or 5 excellent choices, and the net result was far more convenience for the consumer, far more transport efficiencies, far more efficient with the packaging, more cost effective, and so down the list for so many ways. And trust me, that transition has gone global. So look, there are many aspects there. There's other aspects in food production. I do notice there's a few of my old Simplot mates online tonight, and they'll indicate what's happened is chicken tonight in a jar has gone to a pouch, did weigh 500 grams of product. It will now have 200, taken the water out. It's thicker, but it's much easier to open. And the efficiencies of the packaging are considerably greater. So look, back to Antonio's point, Adam, there are many examples out there, but if I might pinch one of Lily's lines, use those SPGs. It's a fantastic toolbox of going through it, and I'll touch on it in my presentation shortly. Lily, over to you to add your part.
I don't think there's much more to add to that, Ralph. I was going to refer to the same thing. So definitely, I think we refer to it as product packaging innovation, but yeah, where you can totally reapproach. Other examples are where I think things like your software used to come with a disc and with a big cardboard box around it, and now you just download it off the internet. Even with your dishwasher tablets and no longer having any packaging, they just dissolve straight into all those types of things. Yeah, fantastic place to go, straight to the SPGs, but a great example.
Thanks, Lily and Ralph. We have another question that's asking about, when you're looking for packaging options, where can we find the recommendations of what type of materials we should be asking our suppliers for in fibre packaging?
Okay, I'll go first. Firstly, you need to share with them what is the product that you wish to pack. What is the supply chain that you wish to ship it through? And who are the expected consumers and customers? There's a lot in that. That's a short question, but I've got a really long answer for it. I'm sorry. But there are many factors to it, and I can only recommend to that anonymous person is that you sit down with your supplier and just take them through what you're trying to achieve. Then ask them to come back with their best recommendation that meets 2025 national packaging targets and any other sustainable goals that your business may have. So that's my brief answer to that one.
Yeah, I would agree with Ralph on that one as well. I think particularly looking for if we're all progressing towards these national packaging targets and trying to make sure you've got the best option there. And as I kind of touched on in mine, really asking for that evidence when you're in that space as well. I've seen a lot of packaging specifications that say 100% recyclable, and they're definitely not. So definitely ask those detailed questions. What is that based on? What market is that in? And that's why Warren and I have done this research, so that we really can unpack and give as much guidance as we can. So there are a couple of different international guidelines out there about fibre-based packaging recyclability. I think the World Packaging Organization just released a fantastic resource that does have some reference in there as well. So that's another one to jump in and have a look at, and one that we as APCO are also working to develop a bit more detail for fibre packaging once we finish this project.
Yeah,
Thanks, Lily. Oh, sorry, Warren, you go.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's things like, well, is it food contact? Is it, are you wanting to protect against shock? The design for each of these will be completely different depending on the answers.
Thanks for the answers to that question. I might actually answer this last question that we have, where the question is around what do our key retailers in Australia think about 100% recyclability? Is it important in ranging? Well, at the very start of the presentation, I did add a little tidbit about, Woolworths aggressively pursuing some of the APCO targets, where Woolworths were looking at implementing it by 2023. So I would actually say it's incredibly important aligning whether it's 100% recyclability your products or packaging has. It's pretty important to actually have that as part of your ranging into supermarkets.
I'll make it easy for you, Adam. Try ranging without it. See how far you get.
You would have to pull it back. 25 comes along, you'd have to pull it back, and then you'd be paying all the expenses. I guarantee you your retailers will not pay that expense.
Very pragmatic, Ralph.
All right.
Adam, just before you move on, can I just have one quick question for Lily? Fascinating the way you sum things up with 1, 2, and 3. I'm in the Monash Food Innovation Centre, we're all about consumerism, as you can imagine, and trying to plot and predict, their inputs. And you say that the correct disposal of packaging for recovery is something that's point 3 that we should be very aware of when we engage the consumer. Are we going to be asking them to do anything differently than they do now with their recycling, or is that just business as usual, but heighten the importance of that needing to happen?
Oh, I guess it depends what you classify as business as usual. But I think the main thing with the Australasian recycling label is there's a lot of research and consumer and industry research that's really gone into it. And the distinction that it has is it does have that evidence base, being the packaging recyclability evaluation portal. So when consumers see that label, they have the trust that that business is going through that process, and they're not just downloading a Mobius loop and popping it on, they can see that they've gone through that due diligence process. And the other differentiating factor is it provides recycling information for every separable component of packaging that you have. So if you've got a box and a bag and maybe an extra sleeve or something else in there, right now a lot of the general recycling information is, you know, your please recycle, but you don't actually really know what to do with that. So per separable component, we're providing that really quick, easy, as you're walking to the bin, you finish making your dinner and you're tidying up, you don't know what to do with all of these pieces, you've got that artwork there for each of those. So that really is trying to make it nice and easy for the consumer. They don't have to think after a long day of work, you can just straight away know what bin to put each of those pieces in.
Perfect, thank you.
Rod, I'll just add to, because we're going to stick to this Sustainable Packaging Guidelines theme between Lily and I tonight, that's for sure. Well, the very first principle is designed for recovery. So if I might put it then back to the packaging technologists who are part of this, your role is to make sure that the total pack that you've designed in the first place is suitable for recovery. The labeling helps clearly with the consumer to dispose of it, but if they've got 6 or 8 items to dispose of in different places, it's going to get pretty messy fast. The simpler you make it and you design it in the first place to how it should be recovered, then it will flow, and the label is complementary to that. So it isn't just the consumer, it's the packaging technologists and the business who have to design it for that purpose.
And these days, Ralph, it's becoming part of the decision matrix for a consumer to buy into the product altogether as to how the packaging can be recycled. Well,
not just recycled, you've got to be able to access it, you've got to be able to read it, you've got to be able to do things with it. There's a whole mixed bag there, Rod. It isn't just the recovery side of it, but being smart about it and minimizing your different materials that you use, to me, is the essence of the total picture. The packaging is truly functional.
Very good.
Very good. All right. Well, thanks for that. Great questions there from the participants. Now, we are running a little bit behind time, but I would recommend everyone just to bear with us with a bit of about 5 to 6 minutes over, because we've got our lovely esteemed colleague over here from the Australian Institute of Packaging, Ralph Moyle, who's been graciously answering some good questions. We've got his presentation now. Ralph, I will share my screen. Please just ask for your next slide when you want to move on.
Just bring it all up. Thanks, Adam, because after the earthquake, my computer system today has been absolutely... I'll leave a few words out. All right, next one. Thanks, Adam. Well, let's move along. Okay, I think if I might just, Lily has displayed to you what APCO can provide in support to businesses, and it's considerable. So to those of you who are out there just saying, look, how the heck do I get answers to my problems? Well, APCO has got a fantastic range of support, so I'm here to endorse that. But I'm also here to show you what the AIP can do as an educational institution. We're not for profit. We hold a lot of training courses for all sorts of businesses of all sorts of size. And that's just a quick brief of what we can do. Next slide, please, Adam. Let's talk about key matrices of thinking. I think, Rod, this was one of the points you were just touching on. Those R's, and you can find plenty of others on the internet if you so choose, but go back and rethink first. Just have another look at what you're putting out in the marketplace, not just the primary packaging, but the secondary as well. Then go through a redesign process. Reducing materials to the optimum level is always the best answer, not just for practicality of recycling, but also for cost effectiveness of the product. The next key one, and this is a growing trend, more outside food industry related than with it, but reuse of packaging is the most financially beneficial of the lot, in particular in secondary packaging. And that's what I mean by the box that ships things around, if you will, or the pallets or things like that. And for the special reason, recycling comes last. It's a bloody expensive, complicated process. And if you can avoid it by doing all the other points above, you'll be a lot better off, and so will your consumers, and so will our environment. Adam, if you will. 25 national packaging targets. Liz touched on those. I'm not going to spend too much time reiterating. Again, please, Adam, I'm cautious of your time and I'm looking forward to the questions and answers. Those are the targets. There's another waste hierarchy. So instead of just looking through your packaging, also look through the waste in your business or at your customer or your consumers. There's a different way of thinking through that at all as well. And I think, Rod, that gets back to the other part of the question you raised a couple of moments ago. Adam, if you would. Right, going to spend a little moment here because this is where Lily and I totally overlap here. Guys, if you don't take nothing else out of tonight, screenshot that, post it on your desk, your wall, or wherever you are. And if you can get through those 10 principles, you will have an excellent grasp of most efficient, optimized, and sustainable packaging formats. Now, appreciate some are more complicated than others, and there's a good deal of understanding. ARP does training courses. There's one coming up next month if you want to join me. But those are the key 10 principles that we all need to understand, whether you're a multinational corporation or a very small SME. Trust me, they all still count. Adam, if you would. This is the link between the 10 design principles and the SPGs, and certainly if you're a member of APCO, getting this into your action plan, and correspondingly your annual report comes out the other end. So these work together particularly well. Adam, if you would. Right, we're going to stop here for just a moment. The underpacking is a danger. So if you go too light, the environmental impact, this is on the left-hand side of your screen, goes exponential really fast because you're not just losing your packaging, you're losing the product as well. Total loss, it's a waste. If you go too far on the right-hand side, just by adding excessive packaging, it provides nothing. You're looking for what I call the Goldilocks spot in the middle, not too hot, not too cold, just right. Okay. Adam, if you would. This one here kind of tells the same story, but it's into food waste, which is certainly one of the key cornerstones of the AIP's messages these days, is that yes, we do need to optimize packaging, but we've got to protect the food. There's far more environmental sustainable forces involved with the making, processing and handling of the food than there is of the packaging by quite some distance. And my second takeout for you tonight after the 10 SPGs, sorry, Adam, go back, please, is that line at the bottom. As little as possible, as much as necessary. And you just got to apply that balance to every scenario you come to. As little as possible, as much as necessary. I think that one states my case straight away. Recycling isn't your first thought. In fact, it's your last. There's so many other key factors to go through in optimizing your sustainable packaging before you even start to get to recycling. And yes, we'll cover that in the SPGs. Next one, please, Adam. All right, there should be a YouTube hidden behind this. This is the point Lily was making about ARLs on pack and the consumer education campaigns. It's a fantastic campaign. As you walk through your Coles, Woolies, Aldi's these days, you will find these labels everywhere, and I'm going to highlight them if you haven't recognized them. So if you would please, Adam, hit the YouTube. Let's hope it plays. Yep. Lily did this. It's all hers, this one, not mine. You got audio?
Research shows that Australians and New Zealanders care about the environment and know that recycling is important. But with more than 200 recycling labels currently in use, getting recycling right can be difficult. The Australasian Recycling Label, or ARL, is one part of a national labelling scheme developed by APCO, Planet Ark and Prep Design that takes the confusion out of recycling for customers and businesses. It provides easy-to-understand instructions about how to correctly dispose of all parts of a product's packaging, including whether it belongs in recycling, the rubbish, or can be conditionally recycled, provided you follow the instructions, such as return to a retail store. However, the ARL is much more than just another label. Manufacturers and businesses whose products carry the ARL must first assess their packaging using the Packaging Recyclability Evaluation Portal. This process assesses their packaging against the national database of recycling information that confirms whether material can be recycled in the Australian and New Zealand curbside or Australian REDcycle systems. It also provides advice about how the packaging recyclability could be improved. The program delivery is overseen by 2 advisory committees, one technical, which helps ensure the ARL program is underpinned by an accurate, evidence-based approach, and one marketing, which oversees the National Consumer Education Campaign. These are made up of representatives from major brands and retailers, government, the waste and recycling industry, and a range of NGOs. By ensuring that the right packaging ends up in the right bin, the ARL will help us all to recycle right. In doing so, we can keep valuable recyclable material out of landfill and ensure a clean waste stream of recycled content that can be used for future products and infrastructure. The ARL plays an important part in supporting us all to reach Australia's national packaging targets and ensuring that all packaging will be 100% reusable, recyclable or compostable by 2025. There are currently more than 200 organisations using the ARL, with support for the program growing every day. If your favourite brand isn't using the label, or if you're a business owner considering it for your own product packaging, you can find out more about the Australasian recycling label at arl.org.au.
Thank you, Adam. This is the kind of label you'll see on many products these days, ladies and gentlemen, and now I'd like to show you a couple of real-life examples. Adam? There's a few there. So you see in the back corner is the normal, near the information on the company address or the ingredients listing, you'll generally find it there. Next one, please, Adam. There's a couple more. And Adam again. These are the kind of facilities you'll find in either Coles and Woolworths, as they are the 2 main collectors of soft plastics. So return to store, this is what it means. And essentially REDcycle is looking after polyethylenes and through replayers makes it into repurposes, if I could use that term, into building materials, playground equipment and many others. Polyrock for concrete. There's a whole explosion of new products made out of repurposed plastics these days. When we do have good designs, and you've got some great ones, certainly the AIP would like to hear from them. We have our annual Peter Awards to promote that. And certainly in this category, may I suggest you look up Birdstone's work with Telstra as one of the best examples I've seen in implementing sustainable packaging guidelines, changing the design and purpose of the packaging for customers and saving them a lot of money at the same time. So it can work. Next one, Adam. An example of some of those awards, local coffee, note the REDcycle and ARL labels there. Next, please. Adam, I'm very conscious of the time, mate. So if you just move through these quickly, these are the kind of examples, ladies and gentlemen. Next one, Adam. Yes, that's an interesting one from Coles. Look that one up, folks. But we like to hear from them because there's some great work going on out there in industry. So please be alert, ladies and gentlemen. You may well be handling some of these, and these are truly innovative packaging formats. This is one for Nestle, to their benefit. APCO's been involved, I think about 10 or 11 others. And this to me is one of the channels, certainly for soft plastics going forward. Thank you, Adam.
Life is all about choices, like choosing to have a break when you need it, or working out instead of watching reruns of In Love with Strangers, or reconsidering your choice of body art. One great choice is to give rubbish the finger and help stop wrappers becoming landfill. Just drop your wrappers off in a REDcycle bin in store so they could be recycled into something useful, like a bench. Give the planet a break. Recycle your wrappers by dropping off in store. Life.
Okay. In the area of pouches has been one that's been contentious. There is a new ARL label for the roll-up variety. Mind you, the pouch has to weigh, I think, of the order of 80 grams, but just the same, another means of recovering soft plastic, but through the traditional system at the recycling facilities.
This packaging is the first to market, not only for the Roll and Recycle program, but for any type of curbside recyclable flexible packaging format made from soft plastics. The addition of the call-out on the front of the pack communicates to consumers the exciting new feature of this recyclable pouch as the first to market curbside recyclable solution for a stand-up pouch pack. The Roll and Recycle label is affixed to the pack prior to the filling process, using an adhesive made to allow the label to be peeled back and re-adhered to the pouch once rolled. The specialised Roll and Recycle label to the back of the pack, in addition to the on-pack instructions for how the process works, encourages the consumer to lift and peel back the label to a certain point and communicates that once rolled, the pack can then be recycled through the consumer's household commingled recycling bin. The Roll and Recycle label allows the pouch to be processed through curbside recycling infrastructure rather than consumers having to return the pack to store for disposal. This adhesive also had to be strong enough to hold the rolled packs in place and maintain the semi-rigid structure required to move through existing curbside recycling infrastructure. The Roll and Recycle label allows the pouch to stay as a semi-rigid, three-dimensional shape once rolled up by end consumers at end of life. By using the label, these packs can be recycled with other monopolymer packaging like plastic bottles, rather than mixed soft plastics. The beauty of the design is that MRFs do not need to upgrade or install new machinery in order for the pouch to be recycled correctly. The program works with existing infrastructure already available in the majority of MRFs in Australia.
Thank you, Adam. Just another example, ladies and gentlemen, from the Peter Awards, and quite a creative one in instant coffee. The next one, if you would, Adam, this is, we touched on refillable, reusable, which is becoming quite an interesting area, and I think it was in one of the earlier questions. Look, there's some of the new style of designs coming through, ladies and gentlemen, which meet that reusable, refillable option. Mostly, I'd have to say, in cleaning or detergent type situations. But trust me, there's a whole aisle of those in the supermarket. So the quantity of packaging involved in that category is enormous. Adam, if you would. Certainly the packaging of meat, and especially bone-in meat, which is really tricky due to the puncture resistance required. But there are certainly some great options coming through there, and Sealed Air have done some great work. That was part of their recognition. Pouches and resealable zippers, easy to grip. Again, in the SPGs, you'll find accessibility is one of the Sustainable Packaging Guideline requirements. Adam? And another one, and I'm aware, Adam, we're over time at the moment, so I'm trying to wind these up. So the next one, please, Adam. Coca-Cola, yes, it's an interesting product, but credit where it's due, they have transformed that type of beverage packaging globally. Yes, you saw most of it initially here in Australia with it going to 100% rPET, but Coca-Cola is taking that program aggressively globally, and they talk in many billions of bottles every day. Scary stuff. Secondary packaging is not to be ignored. I think that's my key message here. We focus on the bottle, the jar, the pouch, whatever, just the primary pack, but there's significant amount of tonnage of packaging, which is secondary, or in this case, even tertiary, regarding pallets. It is all packaging, ladies and gentlemen, not to be ignored when you look across your business. An interesting one here to replace bubble plastic and some of those others, certainly some of the polystyrenes that many businesses are aggressively replacing, as they should if they follow the National Plastics Plan. This is one of the options made out of paper base. This one's made out of, if you like, wool, not commercial wool, not suitable for clothing, but it's then used. It has a fantastic properties. Planet Protector, the manufacturers of that. Design case studies can be found on the AIP website. So not unlike the APCO website, which is fantastic for documents and supporting things these days, the AIP certainly has several as well. For those of you who enjoy books, and yes, I'm one of them, clearly, there's also quite a reasonable selection from our library there, which you can purchase. So the key message there for me to support what Lily said at the beginning is that you have support from a number of organisations with the kind of products that you're trying to address the sustainability of and put a far more important environmental aspect to your business. So if it's not the AIP, certainly APCO is here to support those of you, and certainly the Monash Food Innovation Centre. So Adam, if I can hand back to you now.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Really appreciate everyone sticking around for that additional 5 minutes, and a big thank you to all our presenters. But if I know people will probably start dropping away, but if anyone has a couple of minutes left, we might just answer a couple of the questions that arose in your segment, Ralph, as I know there's been a lot of stimulating conversation in the Q&A. So once again, I do invite people, if they want to open up their mic, just shout out. Otherwise, we will go to the questions board. And there's another question, actually, once again from Tony. The question is around where is the infrastructure for proper reuse and recycling at the household level? Don't we need more incentives, policy, regulations for this to happen? Manufacturers and consumers alike.
Tell me why we need all that infrastructure in the first term, Antonio. I'd prefer to look at more reusable, light weighting, and far less packaging to do the job. So yes, but please don't forget regional Australia, Antonio. This isn't just a metropolitan Melbourne and Sydney debate here, and recycling in regional facilities is a true challenge due to the distance. Any other comments, guys?
No, the only other thing I would add to that is that I guess I would count ourselves pretty lucky that in Australia we have access to some of this stuff straight away, and also that we have a national waste policy action plan with some really big key actions in there that are well underway. I think there's another question in there about standardising council and curbside recycling rules, and that's definitely an action in the National Waste Policy Action Plan that I know there's a reference group underway looking at all of these things. And we also know in Victoria that there's a big focus in that space as well. So I think now is the time that we've seen a lot of action in this space, and it's really about trying to keep at the forefront of that. And that's something that I know the AIP and APCO, and I'm sure this group as well, is really trying to stay on top of, so we can see where that industry is going and where it is innovating and evolving. There's new infrastructure, there's big grants out at the moment from all federal and state really investing in that space. So it's about trying to make sure that as that industry pivots, we as the packaging industry as well can pivot to try and make sure, again, going back to Ralph's point, avoid as much as we can, but where we do need these things, let's make sure they can go through that system as it evolves too.
Yes, completely agree, Lee. We've just got a great question actually from Nathan Hall, and he's asking, are we trying to engage consumers differently to increase our plastic recycling KPIs? Getting the public involved in their own performance may help. I would say Lily is very well placed to do this. This has been a lot of the APCO targets have been exactly that. It's a lot about the education, not of just the industry, but also the consumer base as well. But I might leave the rest for Lily to answer.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, definitely a big focus of the ARL program is to engage that consumer as much as we can. But it's also something that we have been working with APCO members and businesses to be engaging as well. And Ralph played that really fantastic video of Nestle with the Kit Kat, and really thinking about different ways to engage consumers in all of our ARL research. consumers really want to recycle. It's something that they believe is really easy for them to do to minimise their impact on the environment. So it's a great one to get them involved in. And we've seen some other really cool things that, to use Nestle as another example, adding it into, I think they've released sort of recipe cards that are online and that refer to how to dispose of your packaging in that recipe as you're going through. So all those little other types of things, get your marketing teams involved in this to really think about different ways to engage consumers. We're also really lucky that the federal government earlier this year funded the National Consumer Education Campaign to go beyond the ARL and cover sustainable packaging as a whole. So it's something that we did a bit of focus on earlier this year in soft plastics, and did a couple of, there's some free resources available to utilise and those types of things, as well as focusing on reduction and avoidance is one coming up. All those types of different spaces to help engage consumers in playing their part as well.
Lily, if I may, Nathan, I don't know which product range you're referring to, but my exposure is, if I talk to school kids, they get it instantly. It's a no-brainer for them. Unfortunately, and I'm at the wrong age group to be saying this perhaps, but as they get older, I think that's where our struggles get worse and worse with people's habits. And please, people have been asking that question for a very long time. So if you've got something to contribute, we would all love to hear it. But it is some serious changes to people's behaviour, and particularly old ones, that needs to affect. Otherwise, please explain to me why I go for a walk and I find face masks all over the footpath and bottles and cans everywhere. Come on. Yeah, we've got a challenge in front of us there, Nathan. That's a tough one. The ARL helps, but it's still up here for a lot of folk that have just got to change the way they think.
Thank you, Ralph and Lily. Lily, I might just ask for one last one. I think you're actually typing an answer to Jenny Phillips, but I thought it'd be a good question to open out to the wider audience. Lily was asking for packaging that is especially packaging materials that are contaminated, like paper or that has organic contamination. There are some countries putting in legislation to say that these are not recyclable, as it contaminates the recycling stream, and what your thoughts were on that, Lily.
Yeah, it's a really good one. And yes, I was typing, hoping, just in case we didn't get to it, I was going to get back to you there, Jenny. But yeah, it is food contamination or really high product residue is always a concern in recycling. We always want things to be as empty as possible. In fibre, it is of greater concern just the way that it's obviously processed. So I'd probably go back to even some of Ralph's points there before, really rethink the way that you're delivering that product. Ideally, there's a couple of different options. If you're going down the reuse route, then something like that can be cleaned. Other options that we've seen are adding in like a little liner or something like that then can be disposed of with the food, but then you've still got the whole remainder and majority of the packaging that isn't food contaminated that can still then be recovered. So yeah, really rethink about the different ways that product is sort of sitting in your packaging to try and avoid that contamination as much as possible. But things like plastic, there isn't as much of a concern when you do have that food residue there as well. Ralph, do you have anything else to add?
Oh, Jenny and I have had this discussion on more than one occasion, Lily. If I might just go back to one of Antonio's points earlier about compatibility of the product with the packaging. Butter we would all have in our refrigerators at home, hopefully Western Star for you, Jenny. But do you realise it's also one of the most sensitive food products that you would find, in the sense that butter can pick up any odd flavour from any other source and it becomes noticeable. So the weight of the paper relative to the weight of the butter is actually very, very, very small. But because of its fat content, it's also got to be protected from a whole range of issues with its age. So Jenny's fortunately very talented and she will have the solution figured out in no time at all. I hope we're still friends.
And with that vote of confidence, I think that's been great, and appreciate everyone for sticking around for the last few minutes of questions. And I'd like to give a big thank you from Monash Food Innovation for Lily, Warren and Ralph for your time and attending, and talking to our lovely network of all the participants that are on this webinar call. So thank you, everyone. And we'll be in touch soon with hopefully our next webinar topic over the coming months.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, everyone.
Cheers, everyone. Good night.
Bye.